I have a 3 o'clock. I cannot move. Can we sign the distribution order and confirm the wire to my account before we break for lunch? So the $218,000 doesn't sit idle another week, Petra Blaine said. And she was looking at Lorraine Teft when she said it, not at the door. And so she did not see me walk in. I had been standing in the doorway of the conference room at Teft and Hargrove Law Associates for 4 seconds before Petra noticed I was there. The room was smaller than I had remembered from the one other time I had been in it. 6 years ago, when my mother had updated her will and asked me to come with her because she said I was the one who read documents carefully. It held a rectangular table with 4 chairs on either side, a credenza against the far wall with a coffee setup and a half-full carafe, and a single window looking out onto Grey Street. The morning was flat and overcast. Outside, the temperature was 31 degrees. The offices across the street were still dark. It was 8:47 a.m. on December 18th, and I was 41 years old, and I had the folder in my bag. Lorraine Teft sat at the head of the table in a charcoal blazer, reading glasses on 2 manila folders aligned squarely in front of her. She was 58 and had the particular stillness of a woman who has spent 3 decades watching families negotiate with each other in small rooms and has long since stopped needing to perform authority. She looked at me when I came in and did not change her expression. Petra was in the chair directly across from where I would sit, her back to the window, which meant the winter light would fall on her face for the duration of the morning. She had her good coat on, the camel-coloured one with the tortoiseshell buttons, and her phone was on the table in front of her, face up, the screen still lit from whatever she had been reading. She had arrived early. Of course she had. "Good morning," Lorraine said to me, the professional kind, which is not a greeting, but a cue that the session was beginning. I came in and set my laptop bag on the chair to my left, so I held the strap a moment longer than I needed to. Then I sat down and put the bag on the floor between my feet and kept the toe of my shoe pressed against it. "Vivienne," Petra said. "Petra," I said. She looked well-rested, hair done, the natural twist-out she wore for occasions she considered important. The perfume she had worn to the funeral 2 weeks before. I have a precise memory for smell. 14 years in hospital corridors will do that. You learn to read scent the way you read a chart. Disinfectant means recently cleaned. Stale coffee means the team has been here since 4 in the morning. And that particular floral on my sister means she is expecting something good to happen today. "I was just telling Lorraine," Petra said to me, in the tone she uses when she is not asking permission but issuing a timeline, "that I need to get to distribution early. 3 o'clock, I genuinely cannot push. A supplier commitment. The wire on their end has a cut-off. I need this estate confirmed to my account before 2. Before noon would be better. We'll work through the inventory first," Lorraine said. She opened the top folder. "I want both parties to have a complete picture of the estate before we address the distribution order." Petra looked at her phone. The screen dimmed. She set it face up. Lorraine began. She read in the measured cadence of someone who knows exactly how much each sentence costs to reverse if it is misunderstood. Estate summary. The house at 1714 Aldgate Crescent, appraised at $164,000. No outstanding mortgage. My mother had paid it off 8 years ago and mentioned it to no one. because she was not the kind of woman who announced what she had done. Remaining savings and personal accounts. Total estate value, $218,000. The language of the will itself. Equal distribution to both daughters. Vivienne Simone Caldwell and Petra Renee Blaine. Née Caldwell. No codicils. No amendments in the 12 months prior to death. When Lorraine said $218,000, Petra leaned forward an inch. It was the first time she had moved in 2 minutes. I kept my hands in my lap and my foot against the bag and my face level. I had been carrying a different number for 2 weeks. $109,000. My equal share of the estate if it was split honestly. Rosa Vega had named it on a Tuesday morning at my kitchen table. Past tense. This is what you would have had, Viv. And the past tense was not an accident. Rosa Vega is precise about verb tense. She had been naming the damage accurately, so I could stop doing the calculation myself at 4 a.m. I had written the number in my phone's notes and read it on 3 separate nights when I woke up in the dark. Not because I needed to remember it, but because I needed to stay honest about what I was doing and why. Lorraine moved into the personal property inventory. Waterford crystal. 8 pieces. Cast iron cookware. 4 units. Framed teaching certificates from Howard and from Crestfield Unified. The one from when she made principal in 1997, and the one from her retirement. An oil painting my parents had bought at a street market in Douai in 1989, when they were newly married, and my mother had spent $40 on it because she liked how the colours were layered, and it had been on the same wall in the front hallway for 34 years. My mother had kept beautiful things and kept them carefully, and Lorraine named each one in the flat shorthand of appraisal language, and I listened to each item arrive. "Who gets the crystal?" Petra said. "The will specifies equal distribution of personal property," Lorraine said, without inflection. "We'll work through an itemized list for anything that can't be divided." "I know what the will says. I'm asking what the plan is." Lorraine turned a page. Petra checked her phone, set it down, picked it up again almost immediately, and read something she did not respond to. I moved my hand under the table, found my own thigh, and pressed my index finger down once. 1, then moved to the count. 2, and I worked through the 47 the way I work through a radiology batch at Crestfield Regional before it goes to archive. 1 deliberate press per document. No rushing, no skipping, because the entire function of counting is that it forces you to be honest about what you actually have versus what you've been telling yourself you have. 14 years, you develop a physical memory for a count. Your body knows when the number is wrong before your brain finishes the calculation. 1 through 47. The number held. 47 ATM receipts, organized chronologically in the folder in my bag. Oldest to newest. The account moving from $74,200 to $4,180 across 6 weeks and 1 day. The smallest transaction, $310 on a Thursday afternoon in late October. The largest, $4,300, repeated on 9 separate Tuesdays. 9 Tuesdays, 9 dialysis days at Mercy Lake Medical Center. 9 mornings when my mother was in Bay 7 with the window view she always asked for, watching the parking lot from the blue upholstered chair. 4 hours away from the house, and from the joint account's ATM card that Petra had been given for emergencies. Rosa Vega had found the Tuesday pattern on a Saturday morning at my kitchen table. She had been working through the spreadsheet for 40 minutes without speaking. And then she looked up and said, "Viv, look at these 9 rows. What day of the week is that?" I had looked. I had already known the answer before I looked. "The way you know things you have been declining to name out loud for several weeks." I had set my coffee cup down and not picked it up again. I put my hand back in my lap. If Lorraine signed the distribution order before seeing the folder, the wire to Petra's account would clear within the hour. I had asked Rosa Vega about the timeline the afternoon she used the phrase "no straightforward recovery mechanism." She had said it precisely, and I had written it down in my phone and read it more times than I had read the $109,000. Within the hour, the $52,000 that Petra had taken from my mother's account in 6 weeks, 47 transactions. The smallest $310, the largest $4,300, would be absorbed inside her dispersed share before noon. Not impossible to recover after that, but costly and slow, and dependent on Petra choosing not to contest it, which she would not choose. That was what no straightforward recovery mechanism meant. That was why I was sitting in this chair, with my foot pressed against the bag, and my count confirmed, and my face level. The folder was in the bag, with my mother's handwriting on the label. Constance! Medical/Financial 2024. She had written it in September on a Sunday afternoon when she had a good day. Pain managed, the dialysis fog lifted, her mind clear and her handwriting precise. She had called me and asked if I could come over and help her get her papers in order. "I want everything in one place," she had said. "I want it all organised so nobody has to go hunting after I'm gone." She had not said it morbidly. She was a woman who had organised things for 30 years. And she was applying the same logic she applied to everything else. She had written the label herself in the block capitals she used for official correspondence. The same hand that had written 30 years of report cards and faculty memos, and the firm letters she sent home to parents who needed to understand something important about their children. Her hands had been stiff that September, the tendons swollen from the fluid the dialysis was clearing too slowly, and the strokes were slightly thicker than her usual hand. But the letters were even. She handed the folder to me when she was done and said, "You'll know what to add." She meant insurance cards. The advance directive we had updated in August. The hospice referral paperwork we had not yet acknowledged was coming. She had not meant bank statements. She had not known to mean bank statements. I had trusted her that I would know what to add. In September, I had not known. Lorraine paused at the bottom of a page and moved to the debt and tax section of the estate. Property taxes current. Utilities paid through the billing cycle. One outstanding medical bill from Mercy Lake Medical Center. $347, pending insurance processing. She read the amount in the same steady cadence she used for everything else, and turned to the next line. I kept my face still. Mercy Lake Medical Center, renal dialysis. Tuesdays, 9:30 a.m., Bay 7, the window chair, 4 hours away from the house. Petra had not reacted to the name. She was looking at her phone. "Before we go further," Petra said, setting the phone down and addressing Lorraine with the directness she uses when she has been waiting to say something and has run out of patience for the sequence. I want to put something on the table. I was heavily involved in managing things in the final weeks. Mom's appointments, her affairs, keeping things running. There are costs to that kind of management that don't get reflected in a straight equal distribution. I'm not trying to complicate anything. I want to raise it now, so we don't have to come back to it. The room was quiet for a moment. A caretaking compensation claim is a recognized petition in probate proceedings, Lorraine said. Her voice had not changed register. Your attorney prepares the supporting documentation. Time logs, expense records, any written agreements with the decedent, and files a formal petition. It's a separate proceeding from today's distribution order. I'm not filing a claim, Petra said. I'm noting it for the record. It's noted, Lorraine said. Petra looked at me. I looked at the window. It was 9:29 a.m. Grey Street outside had begun to move. A city bus stopping at the corner. A delivery truck backing slowly into a loading zone. 2 people in dark coats crossing toward the coffee shop on the near corner without looking up. The light was still flat. Still the grey that comes with a December morning that has no intention of improving. Lorraine turned a page. Her voice resumed. I had been carrying a word from the previous evening since I drove home and sat in the dark driveway for 20 minutes. With the engine off. Lorraine had used it at 8:15 p.m. in this same room when I had spread the folder's contents across the table and she had read through every page without speaking. Circumstantial. The records were compelling. She had said that exact word. Rosa Vega's analysis was thorough. The Tuesday pattern was striking, but without a documented link between the specific withdrawal dates and a formally established period of diminished capacity. A contested probate motion would face a standard higher than what I needed to clear. I had driven home. I had sat in the driveway with the street dark and the porch light off. I had not remembered to leave the porch light on. And I had told myself, sitting there, that I had done what I could. I had 47 receipts. I had Rosa's 5-day written analysis. I had the count and the pattern and the number. I had done the work. I had done it in 14 days, while Petra spent those same 14 days planning what she would do with $218,000 before noon on December 18th. And then I went inside, and there, on the kitchen counter, in the mail pile that had been accumulating since the funeral, condolence cards with handwritten return addresses I did not recognize. A cable bill forwarded from Aldgate Crescent. A prescription renewal I had forgotten to call in. Were 9 envelopes from Mercy Lake Medical Center. Appointment confirmation slips. Each one printed with the dialysis appointment, date and time. 9:30 a.m. Renal dialysis. Constance Caldwell. Mercy Lake Medical Center, renal care. Each one stamped. Each one dated. I had fanned them out in my left hand and read each date twice. And then I had opened my laptop bag and taken the folder out and placed the 9 slips. Paper clipped together, at the back of the stack. That was 11 hours ago. Lorraine did not know those slips were in the folder. She had not seen them when she read through it the night before because they had not been in the folder the night before. They had been in the mail pile, arriving from Mercy Lake weeks after the dates they confirmed, with no sense of their own urgency. Medical appointment correspondence always comes late. I had been sorting my mother's forwarded mail since December 4th and had not reached the Mercy Lake envelopes until last night, standing at the kitchen counter at 10 p.m. with the overhead light on and the house quiet around me. 9 Tuesdays, 9 dialysis appointment slips, 9 matching rows in Rosa Vega's spreadsheet. The word Lorraine had used the night before was circumstantial. I did not think she would use that word again this morning. Lorraine looked up briefly at both of us and turned to the next page of the inventory. Her voice was even. The sequence was proceeding exactly as she had said it would. I was waiting for the moment she would turn the page to distribution. And she knew I was waiting. And Petra did not know why. Petra checked her phone. 9:44 a.m. I pressed my toe against the bag strap and breathed in on a 4 count and out on a 4 count the way my mother taught me to breathe before anything that required staying level while the room got difficult. She had learned that from 30 years of parent conferences, from sitting across from people who were certain they were right and discovering, slowly, that the document said otherwise. She had been a woman who prepared for hard conversations by making sure her files were in order first, and then by breathing and waiting for the room to do what rooms do when the evidence is complete. I kept my hands in my lap and my face toward the window, and the count confirmed in my body. 47, still 47, and I watched Grey Street move past the glass and thought about where the folder had started, because it had not started as evidence. On December 4th, standing in the parking lot of Greater Grace Baptist Church in the wool dress my mother said was the right one for important occasions, watching them carry her casket out into the December cold, while Petra delivered the eulogy about weight and distance and everything she had managed from far away. I had not known what I was going to find. I had one receipt from a First Heartland ATM on Route 9, October 14th, $740, in the back pocket of a coat my mother had not worn in weeks, which I had found when I was sorting her things. One receipt. I had put it in the labelled folder and told myself I didn't know what it meant. That was not entirely true, but one receipt is not 47 receipts. And grief does something to certainty, and I had needed 14 days before I was ready to look directly at what I had. I just had not known yet. On December 4th, what looking directly at it was going to take. The dress was still on when I sat down at the kitchen table with the folder. The reception at my mother's house on Aldgate Crescent had ended close to 5 o'clock on December 4th. And by 7, I had driven the last borrowed casserole dish back to the women from Greater Grace who had organised the food. 3 older women who had known Constance Caldwell for 20 years and said very little to me, except to press their hands against mine and look at me in the particular way of people who understand that the only honest thing you can do for someone in the first hours of a loss is not fill in. By 7:30, I was standing in my own kitchen with my hands flat on the counter and the wool dress still on. The dress was dark charcoal, mid-weight, the one my mother always said was the right one for serious occasions. She had said it twice in my life. Once when my father died, once when I went to court with a college friend who needed a witness and didn't know what to wear either. "That dress," she would say, pointing at the closet from across the room. I had worn it today because she had said so, because she was no longer here to say it. And because when you do not know how to make a decision, you sometimes follow the last instruction you were given by the person who knew you best. The house was quiet. I had not eaten since 6 that morning. I stood at the counter for a while. Then I went to the dining room shelf where I had set the folder 3 days earlier. When I brought it home from Aldgate Crescent, on the Saturday before the funeral, and I carried it back to the kitchen table and sat down with it. The folder had been in the back of my mother's desk drawer. I had found it on November 30th when I was working through the administrative paperwork that comes for you in the first days after a death, whether you are ready for it or not. Insurance notifications, death certificate request forms, pharmacy letters addressed to Constance Caldwell for medications she would no longer need, delivered to her address as if none of this had happened yet. The folder was the one I had helped her organise in September. Constance, medical/financial 2024, in the block capital handwriting she used for anything she intended to keep. Inside, the advance directive, the insurance cards, the prescription summary going back 6 months. And tucked near the back, not attached to anything, not organised with anything else. A First Heartland ATM receipt, October 14th, $740, 3:47 p.m., Route 9 branch. My mother had dialysis on Tuesdays. She was always home by 2. I had looked at the receipt for a long time and set it back in the folder and told myself, I don't know what this means. I had kept telling myself that for 3 days. The problem with repeating a sentence to yourself for 3 days is that by the 4th day, you have stopped believing it. Now I sat down at the kitchen table and opened the folder and took everything out. I set the medical papers to one side, advance directive, insurance cards, the hospice intake forms from November, and I began going through what remained. The receipts were loose, mixed in with the insurance correspondence and the pharmacy printouts in no system I could identify. Some still carried the ATM fold, the standard crease they come out of the machine with. Others were folded differently, the way paper gets folded when you push it quickly into a pocket or a purse without looking at what you're doing. My mother's hands had been too stiff in October to fold paper in more than one direction. Her right-hand tendons had been swollen all that month from the fluid the dialysis was clearing too slowly. I had watched her struggle with a prescription bottle cap in mid-October, and she had handed it to me without a word. She had not put these receipts in the folder. Before I had even counted them, I was nearly certain of that. I spread them across the table. 14. I had thought there was one. I sat for a moment with 14 receipts in front of me on the kitchen table. Then I did what I do when I have a set of records I need to understand. I put them in order. Oldest on the left. Newest on the right. October 14th went to the far left. The latest date was November 23rd, 4 days before my mother died. I set them across the table one at a time, reading each date quietly and sliding it into position. And when I was done, I had a line of paper that began 6 weeks before the end of my mother's life and ended in the final days before she stopped being able to get out of bed. I looked at the line. The amounts varied. Most were in the hundreds, a few above 1,000. But 2 stood out immediately, November 9th and November 16th, both for exactly $4,300. The gaps between transactions were irregular. 2 days here, 5 days there, and the irregularity had a particular texture to it. The specific quality of something that has been made deliberately uneven. I did not know that yet. I closed the folder that first night without adding anything up, and went to bed in the wool dress because I was too tired to change. The next morning, I went back to Crestfield Regional for the first time since my mother had been moved to hospice. My supervisor, Renee, had arranged half-day hours for the week. She had lost her own mother 2 years earlier, and she did not ask how I was doing when I arrived. She simply put the intake batch on my desk and said the radiology queue was backed up, and she needed the backlog cleared by Thursday. I appreciated the arrangement, the way you appreciate things that are simply correct, without requiring any performance from you. I cleared the backlog by noon. Then I drove home through the December cold and past Aldgate Crescent on the way. Not stopping, just passing the way I'd been doing since November 27th. Because I was not ready to go inside the house. I could see the front curtains from the road. My mother had not changed those curtains in 12 years. I drove past and did not slow down. December 6th was a Saturday. I cleaned the kitchen and went to the grocery store and came home and stood in the kitchen with the grocery bag still in my hands and looked at the dining room shelf where the folder was sitting. I told myself I would look at it tomorrow. On the evening of December 7th, I went back to the folder. I brought it to the kitchen table and spread the 14 receipts across it the way I had done 3 nights earlier. In date order. Oldest to newest. And I sat looking at the line. It was 10:44 p.m. At 11:20 p.m., I called Rosa Vega. Rosa and I had been friends for 16 years, since we were both 25, and eating lunch in the same parking lot on Fridays, because the office park where we both worked had no common area worth sitting in. She was a CPA now at Greenway Financial Group on Dearborn Street, and she answered her phone at 11:20 on a Sunday night because she always answered when I called that late. She knew what late calls from me meant. She picked up and said my name and waited. I picked up the first receipt. October 14th, First Heartland, Route 9 branch, $740. 3:47 p.m. I read her the date and the amount. The line went quiet. I counted without meaning to. 1 second, 2, 3. Before we go further, if stories about women who kept building the file while everyone around them read their stillness as grief are why this channel exists, a like and a subscribe is how the next one gets found. Back to the phone line. Viv, Rosa said, pull the next one. I pulled the next one. October 17th, First Heartland, Commerce Drive, $480, 4:22 p.m. The next one, Rosa said. October 22nd, $940, Route 9, 2:52 p.m. October 28th, $1,050, Marquette Avenue branch, 3:11 p.m. November 3rd, $1,200, 4:15 p.m. November 9th, $4,300, 9:47 a.m. I said the amount and stopped. Say that again, Rosa said. $4,300. November 9th, 9:47 in the morning. She was quiet for a moment. A different kind of quiet from the first silence. Shorter. The kind that means she is noting something and filing it. Then, keep going. November 12th, $310, 6:22 p.m. November 16th, $4,300, 9:51 a.m. That's the second one at 4,300, Rosa said. Yes. Okay, keep going. November 17th, $890, 2:14 p.m. November 19th, $1,100, 3:58 p.m. November 21st, $4,300, 10:03 a.m. 3, Rosa said. 3, I said. November 23rd, $1,400, 2:37 p.m. I set the last one down. The clock above the stove read 11:39. Outside, a car turned onto the street and passed the house, its headlights sweeping briefly across the kitchen window. And then the street was quiet again. How many total? Rosa said. 14. Dollar amount? I added them on my phone's calculator and told her. $21,390. She was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke, her voice had the specific, careful quality she uses when she's about to tell me something I do not want to hear but need to hear precisely. Vivienne, these receipts are what happened to end up in your mother's folder. Someone withdrawing money from another person's account is not going to save their own receipts and file them. You have 14 because 14 found their way into her papers. There could be twice that. I looked at the line of paper across my kitchen table. 14 receipts in date order. Oldest on the left, the far left edge of whatever this was. Go to the First Heartland branch tomorrow morning when it opens, Rosa said. Request the complete transaction history for the account from October 1st forward. You're on the account. You're entitled to it. You don't need to give them a reason. All right. And don't call Petra, Rosa said. Not yet. I was looking at the October 14th receipt on the far left of the table. I know, I said. I put the 14 receipts back in date order after I hung up and returned them to the folder and set the folder back on the dining room shelf. Then I turned off the kitchen light and went to bed. And I lay in the dark for a long time with the arithmetic working through me whether I invited it or not. 14 receipts. $21,390. However many more there were. The branch manager at First Heartland on Commerce Drive printed 11 pages and handed them across the counter the next morning without asking me why I wanted them. I sat in my car in the parking lot and opened the envelope. Account balance, October 14th, $74,200. Account balance, November 27th, $4,180. I read both numbers. I did not calculate anything. I simply let the space between them say what it was going to say. Then I turned to the transaction history. 47 transactions, not 14. October 14th through November 23rd. 47 ATM withdrawals from First Heartland branches across the city. And the total, when I added it up in the parking lot with my phone screen bright in the grey December morning, was $52,000. I confirmed it twice. The 14 receipts in the folder accounted for 11 of the 47. 11 that had ended up in my mother's papers by chance. Dropped in a coat pocket. Tucked under something on a counter. Left in a place where a woman with stiffening hands and an increasingly uncertain sense of the day, might absently file them alongside her medical documents without understanding what they were. I put the statement back in the envelope and drove home. What I could not yet tell from the statement, from the amounts, from the dates, was how it had started. The first transaction was October 14th, which meant that whatever conditions had made 47 withdrawals possible, they had all existed by October 14th. The account was full. The dialysis schedule was new. Petra had come back to town that same week. I knew that because I had picked up my mother from Mercy Lake the following Tuesday. And she had been confused, trying to recount which day Petra had visited and not quite landing on the answer. And I had found a receipt in her coat pocket that afternoon and slipped it into the folder and told myself I would look at it later. I had told myself that. And then I had not looked. And the withdrawals had continued for 5 more weeks while I was managing the dialysis calendar and the hospice referral paperwork and the careful work of watching my mother move towards the end of her life. To understand what 47 receipts meant, I needed to go back to the beginning of them. To October 14th, to the afternoon I picked her up from Mercy Lake, and she could not account for her own Tuesday. And to the receipt I had held in my hands for 3 seconds before I folded it and put it away. On October 14th, I dropped my mother off at Mercy Lake Medical Center at 9:15 in the morning and drove to Crestfield Regional for my shift. That was the routine by then. Tuesdays, 9:30 a.m., renal care unit, Bay 7, the spot by the window that Constance always asked for because she liked to watch the parking lot while the machine worked. She said watching people walk to their cars made her feel like time was still passing in the normal direction. 4 hours, each visit, I would drop her, drive to work, eat lunch at my desk, and leave early to pick her up at 1:30. October 14th was an unremarkable Tuesday. The drive to Mercy Lake took 11 minutes. Constance was wearing her good blue wool coat, the one she wore to appointments since September, when the temperature started dropping and her circulation stopped compensating the way it used to. And she had her crossword book in her bag, and she did not want to talk on the way. Which was how she always was on dialysis mornings. Quiet and conserving herself for the 4 hours ahead. So I pulled up to the main entrance, and she said, "Be on time this afternoon." Which was what she said every Tuesday, and I said I would be. I watched her walk through the sliding glass doors, and then I drove to work. The Mercy Lake Renal Care Unit smelled of the same disinfectant they used in all 3 wings. The particular sharp, clean scent that lingers in the corridors and eventually attaches itself to you, to your coat, to the sleeve you absently touch while you're waiting. And on the days I came inside to help Constance settle into Bay 7, I would stand at the foot of the chair and watch them get the lines placed. And then I would go, because she did not want me to hover. She had been a principal for 30 years. She had always been the kind of woman who handled her own medical appointments without assistance. And the dialysis had not changed that preference. Only the necessity. Bay 7 had a view of the parking lot and a window that faced east. And in October, the morning light came through it at a low angle and landed on the chair arm, and she would set her crossword book there in the light and work through it until the session ended. That Tuesday morning, while my mother sat in Bay 7 and watched the October parking lot and worked her crossword, $740 came out of the joint account at the First Heartland branch on Route 9. I did not know that because I was 40 miles away and because the account had $74,200 in it, And because I had no reason to be watching it, the utilities were on autopay, the prescription direct debits were set, the account was full and properly managed, and I had not looked at the balance in 3 weeks. I picked Constance up at 1:35 and drove her home and made tea and sat with her until her colour came back. And that was October 14th. Petra arrived 4 days later. She called me on October 17th, a Thursday afternoon, and told me she was coming to stay for a while. Not a question. She said things had been weighing on her, that she wanted to be present for whatever time was left, that she'd been feeling the distance. She said she would stay at a hotel near Aldgate Crescent. She didn't want to crowd Mom, and she was thinking 2 weeks, maybe 3, depending on how things went. I said that sounded fine. I said Mum would be glad to see her. "I know she will," Petra said. She arrived Friday morning in a rental car with 2 bags and a white bakery box from the shop on Clement Street that my mother had loved since we were children. I know this because Constance called me that afternoon, and she sounded lighter than she had in several weeks. And she said Petra brought the almond ones. And I was glad for it. I was genuinely glad, which I want to be clear about, because what I did not know in October does not erase what was also true, that my mother loved her firstborn daughter and wanted her there, and that Petra's arrival had given her something that my particular presence, the practical, logistical, appointment-managing presence, had not been providing in the same way. I went to Aldgate Crescent that Saturday, and Petra was in the living room with Constance when I arrived. The television on low, a half-finished cup of tea on the table between them. Petra looked rested. She had her hair down and she was wearing the kind of casual weekend clothes that on Petra always looked intentional. She said, "Vivienne," and stood up to hug me, and I hugged her back. We did not talk about the boutique or the drive from the airport or how long she was staying. We talked about my mother, which was correct, which was what we were both there for. The second week of Petra's visit, my mother gave her the ATM card. Constance told me about it not as a decision she was making, but as a decision she had already made, in the past tense, the way she told me things she thought I would agree with once she explained the logic. "Petra's running all my errands," she said one afternoon when I was refilling the weekly pill sorter at the kitchen counter. "It doesn't make sense for her to use her own card and wait to be paid back. I gave her the joint account card. I put the Tuesday's pills in their Tuesday slot. She knows not to use it for anything except what you ask her for." I said, "She's my daughter." My mother said, she said it simply, without edge. The way you state a fact that you believe settles the matter. I did not say anything else. The account had $74,200 in it. Petra was running errands. My mother's logic was clear, and it had its own internal consistency. And the truth is that I did not want to be the person who said, "Your daughter might not be trustworthy with your ATM card." I did not want to be that person in October because Constance was tired and her ankles were swelling, and she had, at most, weeks of being well enough to enjoy company. And I was not going to spend those weeks being the daughter who audited her sister. That was the specific wrong belief. I named it that way to myself later. In December, sitting at the kitchen table with the 11 bank statement pages in front of me. But in October, I called it a reasonable choice. On October 22nd, I pulled up to Mercy Lake Medical Center at 1:32 and Constance was already waiting just inside the main entrance, sitting in one of the vinyl chairs near the sliding doors with her crossword book in her lap. The session had run long. Her fluid levels were high again, and they had extended her by 20 minutes to clear the additional volume. And she moved to the car carefully, the way she moved when her ankles were full. I held the door, and she got in. I asked how she felt. "Tired," she said. She looked out the passenger window. "Petra came by." She said it the way she said things she was not entirely certain of, with a slight delay before the verb. "Today," I said. "Not today. The other day." She paused. She had the look she sometimes had coming out of dialysis. Not confused exactly, but the way a person looks when they are reaching for something that keeps moving. "I'm not sure which day. I thought it was Tuesday, but it might have been Wednesday. Or last Tuesday. I lose track." I drove. I was running the calendar in my head. The previous Tuesday was October 15th. The Tuesday before that was October 8th. Petra had arrived October 18th, which was a Friday. So if Petra had visited on a Tuesday, it would have been October 22nd. Today, when Constance was at dialysis for 4 hours. Or she was misremembering, and it had been another day entirely. "Did she bring anything?" I said. "She brought lunch. Or..." Constance looked at her hands. "I think that was the week before." I parked in front of Aldgate Crescent and helped her inside. She went directly to the kitchen to sit down, moving with the deliberateness of someone who is very tired and knows it and has decided not to waste energy pretending otherwise. I took her coat from her in the front hallway and hung it on the hook by the door. Before I hung it, I put my hand in the pocket to check for her crossword book. There was no crossword book. There was a folded piece of paper. I pulled it out without thinking. Thermal receipt paper, the narrow ATM strip. I unfolded it. First Heartland Bank, Route 9 branch, $740, October 14th, 3:47 p.m. I stood in the front hallway. October 14th was a Tuesday. My mother had been in Bay 7 at Mercy Lake at 3:47 p.m. on October 14th, watching the parking lot from the window chair she always asked for. She had not been on Route 9. She had not made this withdrawal. I turned the receipt over. Nothing on the back. I thought about going into the kitchen and asking her about it. I looked down the hallway toward the kitchen, and I could hear the refrigerator running and the sound of Constance lowering herself into the chair with a small exhale. She was 68 years old, and she had just come from 4 hours on a dialysis machine, and her ankles were swollen, and her sense of which day of the week it was had been unreliable for 3 weeks. I could not ask her to account for an ATM receipt right now. I folded the receipt and carried it to the dining room desk, where the folder sat. Constance! Medical/financial 2024, in her handwriting. I opened the folder to the back section and set the receipt inside, behind the advance directive, and closed the folder. I told myself it was probably nothing, a mistake, a misfiled transaction, something that would explain itself when I had time to sit down and look at it properly. I had not had time to sit down and look at anything properly in 6 weeks. I drove home. I made dinner. I did not think about the receipt again. That is the part I have to account for. Not that I was negligent. I was managing the dialysis calendar and the weekly pill sorters and the insurance pre-authorizations for the hospice referral that was, by late October, clearly coming, I was the person who read every piece of paper that came into that house and filed it and understood what it meant and followed up when something needed follow-up. I was doing that. What I was not doing was watching the account and the receipt in the coat pocket. The one thing I had found, the one thing that should have made me watch the account, I had filed it away in the back of the folder and moved on. November was harder than October in almost every way the body can make things harder. Constance's blood pressure began dropping more dramatically after each dialysis session, and the recovery took longer. And by mid-November, she was not recovering fully between sessions. There was a baseline exhaustion that didn't lift the way it had in September and October. A persistent grey cast to her mornings that the hospice nurse named carefully in her notes without naming it as what it was. I was at Aldgate Crescent 5 days a week by then, managing the medication schedule and the supply inventory and the conversations with the hospice team about the transition to comfort care and when we would know that transition had arrived. The hospice nurse, a woman named Jayla, who had been doing this work for 15 years and spoke about dying with the particular plainness of a person who no longer needs to soften it, would arrive on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday mornings and do her assessments and update her charts and drink the cup of coffee Constance always insisted on offering and which Jayla always accepted. I watched Jayla's assessments with the attention I gave to anything medical, not looking away from the numbers, not interpreting them generously. The numbers in November did not require generous interpretation. Petra came several afternoons a week. She and Constance would sit together and watch the afternoon programming Constance preferred. The nature documentaries, the cooking competitions, the old films from before either of us was born. And I would be in the other room with the paperwork. And the sounds of the television would come through the wall. And occasionally I would hear my mother laugh. Those afternoons, I was glad Petra was there. The days she did not come, she was at the hotel working on something she described as an urgent supplier situation. I did not ask for more detail. She had a boutique to run, and I had a care schedule to manage, and we had reached, in that November, an unspoken understanding that we were each contributing what we could, and that we would not audit each other. In the middle of November, I found 2 more receipts. The first was on the kitchen counter at Aldgate Crescent on a Thursday afternoon, half tucked under the edge of a water glass, as if it had been left there by someone who intended to deal with it later and forgot. November 3rd, First Heartland, Marquette Avenue branch. $1,200. The second was on the side table next to the chair Constance always used in the living room, sitting there openly on the wood surface in a way that suggested it had been set down recently and left. November 9th, First Heartland, Route 9 branch, $4,300, 9:47 a.m. I stood in the living room with the November 9th receipt in my hand. $4,300 on a Tuesday morning at 9:47 a.m., which was, to the minute, the window when Constance was at Mercy Lake. I put both receipts in the folder. I set the folder back on the desk. I told myself I would sit down with the folder when things were less urgent. And things were not less urgent for a single day in November. My mother was dying, and I was the person managing the logistics of that. And the thing I kept telling myself was, after, I will look at it after. There will be a defined period of after, and I will sit down in it and look. On November 23rd, Petra came to Aldgate Crescent with a bag of groceries and spent 2 hours with my mother. I was there that afternoon doing the weekly medication sort, and we moved around the house in the pattern we had developed. Not unfriendly, simply parallel, each in our lane. When she was leaving, she said goodbye to me in the front hallway, and told me to call if anything changed. I said I would. I did not know it was the last time she would come before November 27th. My mother died at 4:20 in the morning. The hospice nurse called me, and I dressed and drove. And from the parking lot of the hospital, I had driven to without knowing why. I called Petra, and she answered on the second ring. She was at Aldgate Crescent within the hour. The morning passed in phone calls and paperwork, and Constance had left instructions, names, numbers, the order of contact, written in her block capital hand on a single sheet of paper that she had clipped to the inside cover of the folder with the 3 receipts in the back. I did not open it again that day. The receipts were there, in the folder, the way they had been since October, and I was busy with the work of ending a life administratively, which is its own particular kind of labour. And the folder sat on the desk at Aldgate Crescent, and I did not touch it for 5 days. What I found when I finally did, when I went to the First Heartland branch and the branch manager printed 11 pages, and I sat in the parking lot and saw 47 transactions where I had put 3 receipts, would require me to go back through every Tuesday from October 14th to November 23rd and read each one differently than I had lived it. Rosa Vega's spreadsheet would show me exactly what I had been too occupied to see. The First Heartland branch on Commerce Drive opened at 9 o'clock on Friday mornings, and I was in the parking lot at 8:55. December 6th had a particular cold that came off the pavement and sat at ankle height and made everything feel deliberate. I waited in my car until I saw the door unlock from inside, and then I went in. The branch was quiet in the first minutes after opening. A woman at one of the teller windows was counting her drawer. A man in his mid-40s with a bank manager's lanyard came out from behind the service counter and asked if I needed assistance. I told him I needed the complete transaction history for a joint account. From October, first forward, I gave him the account number from the small notebook I kept in my work bag, the one with the financial reference numbers I had been maintaining since I was 26, and learned that you cannot find information you did not write down. He pulled up the account on his terminal. He asked for my ID. I gave it. "You're a joint account holder," he said. "Yes." He went to the printer. The machine ran longer than a page or 2 would require. He came back with a plain white envelope and said, 11 pages, and handed it across the counter, and that was the entirety of the transaction. He did not ask me why I wanted them. There was nothing in his expression that suggested he found the request unusual. People request their account records. He printed them. I went back to my car. I left the engine off and opened the envelope with the heat still on from the drive and the windows just beginning to fog at the edges. The account summary was in the header of the first page. Balance, as of October 1st, $74,200.16. Balance as of November 27th, $4,180.09. I read both numbers. I did not add or subtract anything. I simply let the space between them be what it was. Then I turned to the transaction history. 10 more pages. I counted the ATM withdrawals methodically. running my index finger down each row, the same way I count a radiology batch before it goes to archive. 1 press, 1 entry. No assumptions. 47 transactions. I had found 3 receipts in my mother's folder in the weeks before the funeral. Those 3 were here, confirmed on the pages in my lap. The other 44 had been made and spent and left nowhere my mother would find them. No coat pocket, no kitchen counter, no side table by the living room chair. They had simply gone, and the account had gone from $74,200 to $4,180. And that was what remained. I added the total 3 times on my phone's calculator. $52,000. Even I confirmed it each time because I needed the number to be a fact and not an estimate before I called Rosa. Then I put the statement back in the envelope and drove home. Rosa Vega arrived at my house on Saturday, December 10th at 9:20 a.m. with her laptop bag and a thermos of coffee she had brewed at home. She had been a CPA for 13 years, and I had known her for 16, and I knew that bringing her own coffee was not a preference, but a system. She did not work well with variables she had not controlled. She set the thermos on my counter without opening it, and came to the kitchen table and said, "Clear everything off." I cleared it. She set up her laptop, connected to my Wi-Fi, and opened a spreadsheet that was already structured. Column headers in place. The rows half-populated from the photos I had sent her the previous afternoon. She had done preliminary work on Friday evening before coming. This was how Rosa worked. She did not arrive to a problem cold. She arrived to a problem she had already begun. "I need you to answer questions," she said. "Only what you know for certain. If you're guessing, say so." "All right." She looked at the screen. "Your mother's dialysis schedule. What day of the week?" "Tuesdays." "Every week from when?" "First week of October. The nephrologist switched her from monthly to weekly when her kidney function dropped in September. October 1st was the first Tuesday session." Rosa typed. She pulled up a calendar on a second window and cross-referenced the dates against the October entries in the spreadsheet. "Time of day," she said. 9:30 in the morning, 4 hours, with occasional extensions if her fluid levels were high. She was usually ready for pickup between 1:30 and 2. "And you picked her up yourself on Tuesdays?" "Every Tuesday through November 12th. After that, the dialysis center arranged medical transport." Rosa nodded, still looking at the screen. She had added a column to the spreadsheet while I was answering. Day of week, populated by a formula running off the date column. Every row now showed the day. She filtered the view to show only transactions coded as Tuesday. 9 rows appeared. I came around the table to look at the screen. Each of the 9 rows showed a Tuesday between October 14th and November 21st. They each showed a timestamp between 9:47 a.m. and 1:03 p.m., and each row, without a single exception, showed the same amount, $4,300. Rosa let the filter sit there. She did not say anything for a moment. 9 transactions, she said finally. All on Tuesdays. All during the 4-hour dialysis window, all for exactly $4,300. She paused. That's $38,700 in 9 transactions that are identical in amount and consistent in timing. The kitchen was quiet. Outside, The December morning was flat and grey. The kind of day that gives nothing back. "This isn't opportunistic, Viv," Rosa said. "This is a system." I looked at the 9 rows. I read each timestamp. 9:47 a.m., 9:51 a.m., 10:03 a.m. Like each one during the specific window when Constance Caldwell was in Bay 7 at Mercy Lake Medical Center with a dialysis needle in her arm, her account card in Petra's possession, and no way to know what time it was or which Tuesday it had become. Rosa cleared the filter and scrolled through the full 47 rows. The other 38 transactions were varied. Different amounts, different days, different branches. The smaller withdrawals mixed in among the larger ones with no visible pattern. But the 9 Tuesdays sat in the data like load-bearing columns. They were not the whole of what Petra had taken. They were the architecture. Rosa spent another hour working through the branch locations, mapping each ATM address against the city grid to see whether the locations were consistent with someone operating out of Aldgate Crescent. They were. Every transaction fell within a 5-mile radius of my mother's house. She calculated the per-week depletion rate and charted the account balance as a declining line across the 6 weeks. The line did not plateau. It ran steadily downward from $74,200, transaction by transaction, at a pace that would have reached 0 sometime in December if Constance had lived into December. Rosa sat back at noon and poured coffee from the thermos into 2 cups. She pushed one across the table toward me. "How do you want to handle this?" she said. I'd been holding the question since Friday morning in the parking lot. "I want to take it to the estate attorney before the will reading." I said, "Lorraine Teft, December 18th is 12 days away." Rosa considered that. She turned her cup slowly in her hands. "You could send a demand letter first, directly to Petra, a formal written demand for repayment before you involve the attorney. It gives her the chance to return the money without a legal proceeding. Sometimes that's enough. Sometimes people respond to a private letter because it's quieter than a courtroom." I thought about the 9 rows, 9 Tuesdays, not a moment of opportunity, a schedule. "No," I said. Rosa looked at me. "A demand letter tells her I have this," I said. "She has 12 days to prepare. She has an attorney she can call, and a story she can build and documents she can arrange before I ever walk into Lorraine Teft's office. I don't want to give her 12 days. Rosa was quiet for a moment. She looked at the spreadsheet. I watched her think about it. I could see the CPA side of her working against the friend side. The friend side wanting to protect me from a harder path. She had seen what I had found, and she had named it clearly. But she had not yet fully reckoned with what naming it clearly actually required. "Then I need to write this up formally," she said. "The kind of document you hand to an attorney. Not just notes, a complete written analysis, formatted the way I'd file professional findings." "How long?" "December 15th, 3 days before the reading. I can have it to you by December 15th, if I start tonight." "I said that worked." She packed her laptop at noon and left the thermos on my counter, which was her way of saying she intended to come back for it. I stayed at the kitchen table with the 11 pages spread out in front of me, and I went through the 47 rows one more time, beginning to end, the way I go through a file I need to know by heart before I hand it to anyone else. Rosa's written analysis arrived by email on December 15th at 7:42 p.m. 8 pages. She had structured it the way she structured all her professional filings, each finding followed directly by its source data, each claim accompanied by the transaction rows that supported it. The Tuesday pattern had its own table, 8 columns wide, cross-referencing each of the 9 transactions against the corresponding dialysis appointment date, the session start time, and the window during which the account holder was medically documented to be away from home. She had been precise in her language throughout. She did not write that Petra Blaine had made the withdrawals. She wrote that the withdrawals were made from the account during periods consistent with the documented medical absence of the account holder, and that the pattern of amounts and timing was inconsistent with ordinary transactional use of a joint account held for household management purposes. She let the data state its own conclusion. She had done 13 years of professional work, and she knew that the document that persuades an attorney is not the document that argues. It is the document that names, specifically, what the data shows, and then stops. I read the analysis twice. I called Lorraine Teft's office and left a message for her assistant requesting an evening meeting before December 18th. The assistant called back December 16th and offered 7 o'clock on the evening of December 17th. I said yes, and I did not mention to Petra that I had made the appointment, and I did not mention to anyone else what I was bringing to it. What I did not know yet, going into that room on December 17th, was that Lorraine Teft would read every page of the analysis and then use a single word that would send me home with a problem I had not accounted for, and that I would solve it by going inside and checking my mail. I set the folder on the conference table at 7:04 p.m. on December 17th, and Lorraine Teft looked at it for a moment before she picked it up. The building on Grey Street had been mostly quiet when I arrived. The lobby lit and the upper floors dark. Lorraine's assistant still at the front desk to let me in before she left for the night. The conference room was the same table, the same 4 chairs on each side, the same single window. But at 7 in the evening, the street outside was dark and the overhead lighting pulled the room inward, and without Petra in the chair across from me, and a distribution order waiting to be signed, the space had a different quality, more deliberate, the way any room feels when there are only 2 people in it, and one of them has been carrying something for 2 weeks and is finally setting it down. Lorraine sat across from me in her reading glasses and her jacket, the one she had been wearing when I met with her the previous year for an unrelated matter. The grey one that meant she was still working and not yet going home. She opened the folder without speaking and began to read. I did not say anything while she read. I have spent 14 years at Crestfield Regional in rooms where the right behaviour is to let the reviewing person review. And I have learned that offering commentary while someone is reading a document is almost always counterproductive. The document says what it says. My job was to have assembled it correctly and to answer questions when asked. Lorraine read the first page. The official First Heartland account statement. Account summary header, the 2 balance figures, and then turned to the transaction history. She read in each page with the deliberateness of someone who was not skimming. She turned 3 pages, then stopped and went back to the second page and reread something. Then she continued forward. When she reached Rosa Vega's analysis, she slowed down further. She had reached the table on page 3, the Tuesday pattern section, 8 columns, date, day of week, time of transaction, a TM branch location, amount, dialysis appointment indicator, session start time, session end time, 9 rows, 9 Tuesdays, $4,300 in the amount column, 9 times. She set her reading glasses higher on her nose and looked at the table for a long moment. "This is your CPA's work," she said. "Rosa Vega. She's been a CPA for 13 years at Greenway Financial Group. She built this from the transaction history and your mother's dialysis records. From the transaction history, the dialysis schedule I had documented on my phone, and her own cross-referencing of the dates. She verified the day-of-week computations by formula and confirmed the session windows against Mercy Lake Medical Center's standard appointment records, which are publicly listed." Lorraine looked back at the table. She read the bottom of the page where Rosa had written the summary. "The pattern of transaction amounts. Timing and frequency is inconsistent with ordinary transactional use of a joint account maintained for household management purposes. 9 transactions totaling $38,700 occurred within documented periods of the account holder's medical absence." She turned to the next page and kept reading. When she finished the analysis, she set it face down on top of the other pages and took her reading glasses off. She looked at me across the table. "How much do you know about the evidentiary standard for a contested probate freeze?" she said. "I know what I've read in the last 2 weeks," I said, "which means I probably know the framework, but not the case-specific judgments." Lorraine nodded. She turned one page back to Rosa's Tuesday table and looked at it again. "The transaction pattern here is striking," she said, "and your CPA has documented it carefully. If I were presenting this to a probate court, I would consider it compelling." I waited. "But compelling and actionable are not the same threshold in a contested proceeding," she said. "If Petra immediately retains an attorney and files a motion to contest the freeze, which, depending on how she responds tomorrow, she may do within 48 hours, the court will evaluate whether there is sufficient evidence of financial exploitation under the state statute. Compelling pattern evidence will get us into that argument. But to sustain the freeze through a contest, we need more than a pattern." "What do we need?" Lorraine set her glasses on the table. "A documented link between the specific withdrawal dates and a period of formally established incapacity on your mother's part. Not a clinical note, a formal determination, ideally from a treating physician, or a capacity assessment instrument, that your mother lacked the ability to monitor or authorize account activity during the relevant window." She paused. "Do you have anything like that?" I thought about the hospice nurse's visit notes. The clinical notation in November. Cognitive changes secondary to renal failure. Orientation inconsistent. I thought about the October 22nd afternoon in the car. Constance unable to account for her own Tuesday. The hospice intake paperwork from early November notes cognitive changes secondary to renal failure. I said, orientation inconsistency. That language is in the file. That's a clinical observation note, Lorraine said. It's not a capacity assessment instrument with a physician's formal determination tied to specific dates. She picked up the Tuesday table and looked at it again. What I need? What would make this motion substantially harder to contest is a document that establishes, for at least some of these 9 Tuesday dates, that Constance Caldwell was medically incapacitated in a way that was documented at the time. She set the page down. Something that confirms she was physically absent from and medically occupied on those specific Tuesdays, in a way that appears in a record that Petra cannot characterize as retrospective. The room was quiet. The dialysis appointment slips would do it, Lorraine said. If Mercy Lake issued appointment confirmation documents to your mother for those specific Tuesday sessions, dated forms, pre-appointment, not clinical notes after the fact, those would satisfy what I'm describing. They would place her in medical care, off-site, and physically unavailable to transact, on the same dates as the withdrawals. She looked at me. Do you have those? I had the dialysis calendar on my phone. I had the appointment summary in my records. I did not have individual dated confirmation slips. I don't know, I said. Mercy Lake sent appointment reminders by mail. I haven't been through all of my mother's forwarded mail. Lorraine looked at me steadily. If those slips exist, and you find them tonight, bring them tomorrow. They change my assessment substantially. She set Rosa's analysis back in the folder and squared the edges. Without them, what you have is compelling evidence of a suspicious pattern. I can freeze the distribution order and present the case for the freeze, and I believe a court would take it seriously. But I cannot guarantee the freeze holds through a contest if Petra moves immediately and the documentation standards I just described isn't met. She slid the folder back across the table to me. That's the honest answer to what you're legally entitled to know. Before we follow Vivienne to the parking garage, if this channel is the place you come for stories about women who kept the paperwork before they understood what it would be needed for, a like and a subscribe is how the next one reaches someone who's in the middle of finding out. The elevator closed at 9:21 p.m. I drove home on the route I always took, the one that passed Aldgate Crescent at the halfway point, and I did not slow down when I passed it. I pulled into my driveway at 9:38 p.m. I turned off the engine. I sat in the dark. The house was dark, too. I had not left the porch light on when I went out at 6:30, and the street was quiet in the particular way of residential streets in December. People inside and warm and done with the day. I sat with the engine off and the folder in my laptop bag on the passenger seat, and I went through the meeting in my head the way I go through a batch audit. Not anxiously, but methodically, item by item, the statement, the analysis, Rosa's table, the two words Lorraine had used, compelling, and then circumstantial. I understood what Lorraine had not said, which was, you have done serious work here, and it may not be enough. I did not call Petra. The thought did not enter my mind as a genuine option. I could not call Petra and say I had been to the attorney's office with a bank statement and a CPA analysis, because calling Petra meant giving her the night to prepare. And the night was mine. After 20 minutes, I went inside. The kitchen was the way I had left it. Coffee cup rinsed, laptop bag's usual spot on the counter. The stack of mail I had been collecting from the forwarded correspondence from Aldgate Crescent since the funeral, which I had been sorting in batches when I had time. I had not finished sorting it. I had gotten through the condolence cards and the utility notices and the insurance correspondence, and I had not yet gotten to the back of the pile. I set my laptop bag down. I looked at the mail pile. I am a person who cannot leave an unsorted pile. which is a professional disposition that followed me home from 14 years of records work. And it was 9:42 at night after a meeting that had not gone the way I needed it to go. And I had nothing to do that was more useful than going through the rest of the pile. I went through the rest of the pile. Behind a pharmacy newsletter and 2 solicitations addressed to my mother's name was a set of envelopes I had not opened yet. White envelopes. Mercy Lake Medical Center return address in the upper left corner. I picked up the first one. It was thin, the kind of thin that means a single page inside, the kind of correspondence medical facilities send to confirm scheduled appointments. I opened it. Appointment confirmation, Constance Caldwell, renal dialysis, Mercy Lake Medical Center, renal care unit. Session date, November 16th, 2024. Start time, 9:30 a.m. November 16th was a Tuesday. I set it down and opened the next envelope. November 9th. The next, October 28th. The next, November 21st. The next, October 14th. I laid them across the counter in a line as I opened each one. And the line grew. And when I had opened all 9 envelopes from Mercy Lake, I had 9 appointment confirmation slips arranged in date order across my kitchen counter. And each one a Tuesday. Each one printed with a session date and start time and Constance Caldwell's name. Each one issued by Mercy Lake Medical Center before each appointment. Not a retrospective clinical note. Not a record generated after the fact, but a pre-appointment confirmation document dated and mailed in the weeks before each Tuesday session. I read each date again. October 14th, October 22nd, October 28th, November 5th, November 9th, November 12th, November 16th, November 19th, November 21st. 9 Tuesdays. 9 documents from Mercy Lake Medical Center confirming that Constance Caldwell had a dialysis appointment scheduled and attended on each of those dates. 9 dates that corresponded exactly to the $94,300 withdrawals in Rosa Vega's table. I stood at the kitchen counter for a long moment. Then I opened the folder and placed the 9 slips, paper clipped together at the back of the stack, behind Rosa's analysis. The meeting at Teft and Hargrove was in 11 hours. Lorraine set the estate inventory folder to her left and reached for the second one. I took the manila folder out of my bag. The session had run 22 minutes. 22 minutes of Lorraine's measured inventory recitation while Petra tracked the clock on her phone, and I sat with my foot against the laptop bag and my hands in my lap, and the count confirmed 47 times over. 22 minutes of Petra noting the crystal, asking about the painting, raising caretaking compensation as a matter for the record, and receiving the same professional non-concession each time. 22 minutes of Lorraine building the foundation she had told me she needed to build. Working through the estate picture before turning the page to distribution. Now she had turned the page. The second folder was the one with the distribution order. I knew what it looked like because I had seen it during the inventory. Lorraine had set it to her right at the start of the session, separate from the estate documents, and its position had not changed in 22 minutes. It was a thinner folder, cream-coloured, and when Lorraine reached for it, I moved. I set the manila folder on the table in front of me and slid it across. "Before we sign anything," I said, "Lorraine should see this." The room was quiet. Lorraine's hand stopped on the cream folder. She looked at the manila folder I had placed in front of her. and then she looked at me. And in the look was a recognition. She knew what this was, because she had asked for it the previous evening, and I had told her I would bring it if I found it. And I had found it. And she moved the cream folder back to her right, without opening it, and picked up the manila one. Petra was looking at the folder. She was looking at it the way you look at something you recognize, but cannot immediately account for. The folder was labelled in blue ink, block capitals, my mother's handwriting, Constance, medical/financial 2024. Constance Caldwell had written that label in September, on a Sunday afternoon when her hands were still cooperative and her filing instincts were still intact. And the label had the particular evenness of a woman who had produced official documents for 30 years. Petra had seen that handwriting her entire life. She knew exactly whose hand that was. She looked at the folder, and then she looked at me, and she did not say anything. Lorraine opened the folder and began to read. She started at the front, the first Heartland account statement, 11 pages. The summary header, first. Account balance, October 14th, $74,200. Account balance, November 27th, $4,180. I watched Lorraine read the summary line and turn to the transaction history. She worked through the pages at the pace she had used the previous evening. Deliberate, thorough, not scanning, but reading each row. The folder was in a different order than when she had seen it last night. The 9 Mercy Lake appointment confirmation slips were now paper-clipped to the back of the transaction history pages, rather than in the rear section where I had placed them at the kitchen counter. I had moved them when I organized the folder this morning, because I wanted Lorraine to see them immediately after the transaction history and not have to flip to find them. She reached the appointment slips. She looked at the first one. She looked at the transaction history pages still in her left hand, and she put them down flat and picked up the appointment slips and laid them on top of the transaction history and read the first slip against the transaction page below it. The date on the slip, October 14th, the matching row in the transaction history. October 14th, $4,300, 9:47 a.m. The slip was printed by Mercy Lake Medical Center's appointment system. Pre-appointment. Mailed to Constance Caldwell's address before the session. Not a retrospective clinical note. Not a record generated after the fact, but a document that had existed before the Tuesday happened. She had confirmed her dialysis appointment for October 14th. The same morning, $4,300 came out of the joint account. Lorraine read the second slip against the second matching row. She read through all 9. She did not speak while she was reading. Petra had stopped looking at her phone. I looked at the window. Lorraine set the appointment slips down. She picked up Rosa Vega's analysis and turned to page 3. She read the section header aloud. Tuesday transaction pattern. Correlation with documented medical absence. Her voice was the same measured tone she had used for the estate inventory. She was not performing the reading. She read it the way she would read any document that required precision. Clearly, at the pace of comprehension. 9 of the 47 transactions identified in the October 14th through November 23rd withdrawal period occurred on Tuesdays. All 9 transactions were for identical amounts of $4,300. Timestamps for all 9 transactions fall within the 4-hour window, consistent with the account holder's documented dialysis appointment schedule at Mercy Lake Medical Center, renal care. Commencing 9:30 a.m. Pre-appointment confirmation slips issued by Mercy Lake Medical Center, dated prior to each corresponding session, have been appended to this analysis and confirm that the account holder was present at a medical facility during each of these 9 transaction windows. The pattern of amount, day, timing, and correlation with documented medical absence is inconsistent with ordinary transactional use of a joint account for household management purposes. Lorraine set the paper down flat on the table. The room was very quiet. She looked at Petra across the table. The documentation in this folder establishes a pattern of withdrawals made during periods when your mother was physically present at a medical facility and demonstrably unable to authorize or monitor account transactions. Lorraine said, 9 transactions totaling $38,700, all during documented dialysis sessions, each for an identical amount. She paused. That documentation, combined with the formal CPA analysis included here, elevates this matter from a civil estate dispute to a potential criminal referral under the state's Elder Financial Exploitation Statute. I am required to take that seriously. She picked up the phone on the table, the internal line, and pressed one button. "Hold the distribution order," she said when her paralegal answered, "Nothing goes out today." She set the receiver down. She picked up her pen and wrote something on the notepad in front of her. Then she set the pen down and waited. Petra's hands were flat on the table. "This is harassment," she said. The word came out with the particular force of someone reaching for authority. They are not sure they have. "Vivienne has been building a case against me since Mum died. This whole thing is harassment. Just process the estate." "Lorraine, that is what you are here to do. Process the estate." Lorraine did not respond. "I want to be clear about something," Petra said. Her voice had shifted. Lower, a different register, the one underneath the command. I was there every week. I was managing things, the grocery runs, the prescriptions, the errands, the logistics of keeping that house running while Vivienne was at work. That is real work. That is real time and real money and real sacrifice. And I am not going to sit here and be treated like a criminal because my sister decided to play detective. I opened the folder. I had put the hospice visitor log printout behind the CPA analysis because it was the secondary document, relevant to Petra's caretaking claim, not to the transaction pattern. And I had learned from 14 years of records work that you organize a file in the order the argument requires it. I found the page and slid it across to Lorraine. Lorraine picked it up. It was a single page. The hospice provider's visitor log from my mother's home care records, which I had requested and received when I filed for access to Constance's medical records in the week after the funeral. The log listed every documented hospice visit during the service period. Names, dates, purposes. Petra's name appeared on the log twice before November 23rd. Once on August 9th in the column labelled Family Visitor. Once on November 23rd, between those two entries, 14 weeks. 106 days. No visits. She had not come back until 4 days before Constance died. Lorraine read the log. She set it on the table. She did not say anything about it. She did not need to. Petra's eyes went to the page. She read what was on it. Her hands were still flat on the table, and they stayed flat. I was managing from a distance. she said. That is still management. Being there in person is not the only form of support that counts. I was on the phone. I was coordinating. People don't understand how much can be managed remotely. I wasn't angry yet. What I felt was closer to the flat, clean sensation that comes when a number confirms what you have spent 2 weeks being certain of. I looked at the window. The December sky had not changed. Grey Street was still grey. People can make allegations about anything. Vivienne. Petra's voice had dropped to something quieter and colder. She was looking at me rather than at Lorraine now. That doesn't make it evidence. You put together a spreadsheet and some appointment slips, and you think that proves something. Oh. It doesn't prove anything, except that you've been collecting paperwork instead of grieving. Whatever you think you've found, whatever your accountant friend thinks she found, is going to look very different to an actual attorney. Lorraine set her pen down. I want to be precise about what happens next, she said. And she was speaking to both of us, but her eyes were level, and she was addressing the room. The distribution order is on hold, pending my review of this documentation. I will be consulting with my firm's probate litigation specialist before I proceed further. If the findings in this folder support what they appear to support, I have both a professional and, in some jurisdictions, a statutory obligation to make a referral to the county probate court and potentially to the Elder Financial Protection Office. She paused. That process will take the time it takes. No estate funds will be dispersed in the interim. She closed the manila folder and set it to her right, aligned with the edge of the table. Petra looked at the folder. She looked at me. She looked at Lorraine. So that's it, she said. You're just going to freeze everything because my sister walked in here with some bank receipts? The session is concluded for today, Lorraine said. She stood. She picked up both folders, the estate documents and the manila one, and held them against her chest. Petra did not move for a moment. Then she picked up her phone and her coat, and she stood. She walked past me without looking at me. I heard her heels on the tile in the hallway, and then the sound of the elevator. And then quiet. I sat at the table for another moment. I was looking at the window. The Grey Street morning was the same as it had been an hour earlier. Flat sky, the delivery truck gone now, a woman walking a small dog on the near corner. The room had the quality of aftermath. The chairs pushed back at angles. The 2 paper cups from the hall coffee machine on the credenza. The estate documents stacked where Lorraine had placed them. Lorraine came back into the room without her jacket, and with a notepad. She sat down. I need you to give me your CPA's contact information, she said, and the name and number for your attorney, if you have one. I don't have an attorney. You should retain one, she said, and she wrote something on the notepad. Within the next 48 hours, if possible. Not because the case requires it today, but because it will require it soon. She looked at me. The appointment confirmation slips were the piece I needed. The analysis holds up. I believe what this documentation shows. I stood and picked up my laptop bag. In the hallway, Lorraine's paralegal, a woman in her 30s who had been with the firm since before I had any reason to know this firm existed, came out of the side office with a folder of her own and stopped when she saw me. "Miss Caldwell," she said. She glanced toward the elevator and then back at me, with the expression of someone making a calculation about what to say. "Miss Blaine's 3 o'clock today. I wanted you to know. She confirmed with that appointment this morning that she would be paying in full. The appointment is with a business creditor." She paused. "The outstanding amount is $31,000. She told the creditor she expected to have the funds cleared before 2 p.m. I looked at the paralegal." She held my gaze for a moment, and then she went back to her office. "I took the elevator down." The lobby was empty, and the grey street morning came through the glass door. Cold and flat. The same December sky it had been when I walked in at 8:47 with the folder in my bag. I pushed through the door and went to my car. By the time I reached the parking garage, my phone had already lit up with a text from Petra. The first of 3 she would send before the evening was out. Each one arriving 20 minutes after the last. Each one a different version of the same argument in a different key. I read the first one in the parking garage before I called Rosa, and I did not answer it. The parking garage under Teft and Hargrove smelled like exhaust and concrete cold. My car was on level 2, southwest corner, where I'd parked at 9:14 that morning because the closer spots were taken and I hadn't trusted myself to keep circling. I found it by memory. I was already dialing before I reached the driver's side door. Rosa picked up on the second ring. "It's done," I said. Lorraine held the distribution order. She picked up the phone herself and called down to processing. There was a pause. Not the 3-second kind from December 7th. Not uncertainty. This was Rosa exhaling slowly through her nose the way she does when something difficult has resolved the way it should. "The appointment slips," she said. She read the Tuesday section of your analysis out loud. The whole paragraph. Petra was sitting right there. Another pause. Then, "What did Petra say?" I thought about how to compress it. 3 things, in order: that it was harassment, that she'd been managing everything from her end, and that allegations aren't evidence. "In that order?" "Yes." Rosa was quiet for a moment. I could hear her moving, the soft sound of a chair or a door. And Lorraine didn't respond to any of them. "Good," Rosa said. Just that. One word, the way Rosa gives verdicts, without decoration, because the decoration isn't the point. I unlocked the car and stood with the door open, not getting in yet. The garage was nearly empty at that hour. Someone's fluorescent light on level 1 was flickering. A soft, irregular pulse I could hear but not quite see. Lorraine's paralegal stopped me in the hallway after, I said, told me Petra had a 3 o'clock, a creditor meeting, $31,000. She'd confirmed she'd pay in full from the distribution. Rosa didn't say anything for a moment. Then. "So the wire this morning wasn't about the money sitting idle?" "No. It was about a specific deadline." "Yes." I got in the car, closed the door. The garage went quiet around me. Just the distant hum of a ventilation fan somewhere above, and my own breathing against the windshield. I hadn't cried. I'd expected to feel something large in that room. Some version of release that cracked open the way I'd imagined it might. and instead what I felt was smaller and more specific. The folder had left my hands and landed on Lorraine's table. And Lorraine had read what was in it, and the distribution order had not gone through. That was all. That was everything. It was enough. Go home, Viv, Rosa said. I'm going. Call me tomorrow if you need to. Don't call me tonight. I won't. I mean it. I know you mean it. I drove home on Route 9 because it was the way I knew, and I didn't want to think about directions. The meridian was open, its red sign reflected in the wet pavement. Same sign it had when I was 17. Same font. Same parking lot. I didn't stop. I passed the dialysis centre at Mercy Lake. Dark at that hour. Its sign lit, but its lot empty. And I looked at it the way you look at a place that has wait for you. Not grief exactly. Something more architectural. A point on a map that connected other points. The house was cold when I got inside. I'd left the thermostat at 62 that morning because I hadn't known how long I'd be. I turned it up and stood in the kitchen for a while without taking my coat off. And then I took my coat off and hung it on the hook by the door and put the manila folder on the left side of my desk, the way I always left it. And I did not look at my phone for the first hour. The first text came at 6:47 p.m. Vivienne, I need you to explain to me what happened today, because I don't understand what you were trying to accomplish. Mom is gone. She is gone. And instead of letting us move forward together, you chose to do this today, of all days. I am her daughter too. I deserve to be treated like I matter in this family. I read it twice. I put the phone face down on the kitchen counter and made myself a glass of water and drank half of it standing at the sink. Looking at the window, which in December, after dark, is just a mirror. The second text came at 7:31 p.m. I want you to know that I was there for her. Every week I was managing her medications and her appointments and making sure she had what she needed. And I did that without asking for recognition or money. I just did it because she was my mother, and that is what you do. I am sorry that I didn't do it in a way that you could see, but that doesn't mean it didn't happen. You have no idea what I was carrying. I read it once. I set the phone down again, this time on the kitchen table, and I sat down across from it the way you sit down across from something you've been waiting for. The words arranged themselves in a sequence I already knew. First the wound, then the justification. Same as in Lorraine's conference room. The registers were the same. The order was the same. The third text came at 9:08 p.m. I have spoken with someone, and I want you to understand that what you did today can be characterized in a number of ways, and not all of them are favorable to you. I am not threatening anything. I am saying that there are two sides to every situation, and I am prepared to present mine. I hope you will think very carefully about what you want the next few months to look like for both of us. I read it 3 times. Slowly, the way you read a document you're going to need to recall later. Then I picked up the folder from my desk, removed the 3-page hospice visitor log, and placed it on the kitchen table beside the phone. August 9th. That was the date of Petra's last logged visit before November 23rd. August 9th to November 23rd. 106 days. I wasn't going to need to characterize anything. The log had already done it. I answered none of the 3 texts. Not that night, not the following morning. There was nothing in any of them that required a response from me. And I had learned, slowly, across 14 days and 47 receipts and a December evening in Lorraine Teft's office, that the discipline of not filling silence is its own kind of work. You have to decide in advance that you're not going to reach for the reply that explains or defends or softens. And then you have to hold that decision each time the impulse arrives. And it arrives more than once. I held it. I made tea. I went to bed at 10:30 and slept 6 hours, which was more than I'd slept in 2 weeks. The paralegal's name was Denny Marsh. He called at 8:54 a.m. on December 19th, a Friday, and when I answered, he introduced himself by first and last name, the way paralegals do when they're delivering something official. I'm calling to confirm the probate freeze notice has been formally filed with the county court, he said. As of this morning, the Caldwell estate distribution is stayed pending resolution of the financial irregularity matter. Lorraine wanted you to know that filing is now a matter of public record. Thank you, I said. Do you have any questions for me? I thought about it. No, I said. I don't have any questions. Lorraine will be in touch in the new year once she's reviewed the CPA analysis in full context of the estate inventory. It may take a few weeks. I understand. Have a good weekend, Ms. Caldwell. I sat at the kitchen table after I hung up and looked at the window, which in December morning light is just a window again, grey and factual, the backyard visible beyond it, the fence, the bare silver maple, the garden bed my mother had replanted every April until she couldn't. The filing was a matter of public record. I'd known it would be, but hearing it said by name, Denny Marsh. 8:54 a.m., December 19th, made it specific in a way that the previous day's events hadn't yet fully become. Documents have weight once they're filed. The freeze wasn't a position I'd taken. It was a fact in a county court. I didn't call Rosa. She'd told me not to call her that night, and I hadn't. And I decided the Friday morning felt like an extension of the same instruction. She'd said she'd be in touch in the new year if nothing changed. Nothing had changed. I trusted her to know the next move better than I did. December 20th was a Saturday. I woke at 7 and made tea. The same loose-leaf green I'd been making since October. The tin my mother had kept in the cabinet above the stove, which I'd taken home after the funeral because no one else was going to use it. I sat at the kitchen table with the mug between both hands. The morning was overcast, the light flat and even, the kind of light that makes everything look slightly more permanent than it is. At 9:22 a.m., my phone lit up on the table in front of me. Not a text, a call. Petra's name on the screen. White letters. The small green accept button, and the red decline button beneath it like a question asked in 2 colors. I did not reach for it. I watched it. That's the accurate word. Watched, not ignored, because there's a difference. Ignoring is looking away. What I did was sit with my hands around the tea mug and keep my eyes on the screen and let it happen at whatever pace it was going to happen. The phone vibrated against the table, a faint rhythmic shudder, each ring a small percussion I could feel through my palms, even though I wasn't touching it. 1, 2. The kitchen was quiet around me. Just the refrigerator's low hum, The distant sound of a car passing on the street outside. 3, 4. I counted without deciding to count, the way you count when you're trying to hold still. 5, 6, 7. The flat grey light through the window made the table look like slate. 8, 9. The screen went dark. I picked up the mug and finished the tea. She would call again. She would send another text, and then another call, and eventually she would do what she'd half threatened in her third message on the 18th. Retain someone, prepare her side, present a number. That was the shape of what came next. Not silence, but a different kind of document. A counteroffer, probably. A reframing of the $52,000 into something with a different name. I didn't know yet exactly what she would call it. But I knew it was coming. And I knew that when it arrived, I would read it the same way I'd read everything else. Once, slowly, looking for the number and the logic beneath the number. And then I would decide what the number was actually worth. The folder was on the left side of my desk. Rosa's analysis was inside it. All 8 pages. The CPA letterhead at the top of the first page. The Tuesday pattern section on page 4. Whatever Petra put in front of me next. That was what it would have to answer. Lorraine filed the formal referral on December 22nd, 4 days after the freeze. The letter arrived in my email at 7:15 a.m. with a subject line that said only R.E. Caldwell Estate, County Probate Court Referral Confirmation. Attached was a 3-page document that laid out, in the flat language of legal filings, what Rosa's CPA analysis had already said in the language of spreadsheets. 47 withdrawals, $52,000, a pattern consistent with a coordinated schedule. The referral did not use the word theft. It used the phrase potential financial exploitation of a dependent adult, which is a more careful phrase that means the same thing once a judge reads the supporting exhibits. I read it twice. I forwarded it to Rosa with no message. She replied 11 minutes later with 2 words. Filed away. January was paperwork. Lorraine's office sent a supplemental inventory request that required me to locate 3 additional years of my mother's account statements. Not just the October-November period, but the full account history going back to when Constance had originally opened the joint account. I spent the second weekend of January at the kitchen table with my laptop and a cup of the same loose-leaf green, pulling statements from the bank's online portal and organising them in chronological order in a new folder I labelled with a date range. Caldwell Account, January 2021 through November 2024. I sent the compiled PDF to Lorraine's paralegal on January 13th. Denny Marsh confirmed receipt at 4:02 p.m. and said Lorraine would be in contact once the court set a preliminary hearing date. Petra and I did not speak. She had called once more after December 20th to December 23rd, a Tuesday, at 11:47 a.m., and I had watched the phone the same way I'd watched it 3 days before. 9 rings. Silence. No voicemail. I noticed, without deciding to notice, that she called on Tuesdays. That detail was not useful anymore. It was just detail. The preliminary hearing was set for February 6th. I did not attend. Lorraine had told me, in a January 8th call, that my presence was not required at the preliminary. The court would review the exhibits and schedule the formal settlement conference. What I would need to attend, she said, was the settlement conference itself, which was likely to be scheduled for sometime in March. She said this calmly, in the measured cadence of someone who had done this many times and understood that the people sitting across from her had not. "Is there a realistic chance this doesn't settle?" I asked. She paused. "There's always a chance," she said. "But the Tuesday pattern alongside the appointment records is a strong evidentiary combination. A competent attorney advising your sister will tell her that." The counteroffer arrived on February 19th. It came through Lorraine's office, forwarded from Petra's attorney, a firm I didn't recognize, based downtown, with a letterhead in a dark blue I noticed before I read the text. The offer was $38,000 returned to the estate in 3 installment payments over 6 months. The remaining $14,000 to be treated as caretaking compensation for time and services rendered during the decedent's final illness. I read the phrase 3 times. Time and services rendered. The hospice visitor log was in the manila folder on the left side of my desk. Petra's last entry before November 23rd was August 9th. That was 106 days, during which she had not signed in once. The October 14th withdrawal. The first one, $740, Route 9, 3:47 p.m., was 2 weeks before her October 18 return visit. The math required no analysis. I had the log, I had the receipts, I had Rosa's 8-page CPA report with the Tuesday pattern section on page 4. I called Lorraine! "I'm not accepting it," I said. A pause. "That's your right. Do you want to tell me your reasoning so I can frame the response?" "My reasoning is that caretaking compensation for services rendered requires the services to have been rendered." There was a silence on Lorraine's end. Brief. The kind that precedes a short response. "I'll convey that to opposing counsel," she said. I drafted my formal written response that evening. It was 1 sentence long. Ms. Caldwell declines the counteroffer and requests that the settlement conference proceed as scheduled. I sent it to Lorraine at 8:47 p.m. She acknowledged it at 9:03. I closed my laptop, put it on the left side of the desk beside the folder, and made tea. The settlement conference was scheduled for March 24th, a Monday, at 2 p.m. at the county probate court on Whitmore Street. I wore the same charcoal wool dress I'd worn to the will reading in December. I brought the folder. Lorraine had told me I likely would not need anything from it. The exhibits had already been entered into the court record. But I brought it anyway because I had carried it this far, and it was not something I was willing to leave at home. The conference room on the 3rd floor of the Whitmore building was smaller than Lorraine's had been. A rectangular table, 6 chairs, a window that looked out over the parking structure on the south side of the building. Lorraine was already there when I arrived, along with her associate, a woman named Keene who had handled the exhibit logistics. Petra arrived 4 minutes after I did, with her attorney, the one whose name had been on the February 19th letterhead. He was composed in the way attorneys are when they've already privately communicated to their client what the outcome is likely to be. Petra sat across the table from me. She looked at the folder in front of me for a moment. Then at a point somewhere above my left shoulder. She did not look directly at me for the first 40 minutes. The conference mediator reviewed the exhibits in order. Rosa's CPA analysis, the bank statements, the 9 appointment confirmation slips from Mercy Lake Medical Center, paper-clipped to the 9 Tuesday morning receipts. The hospice visitor log. Each item was referred to by exhibit number. The mediator read a 2-paragraph summary of the Tuesday pattern aloud, pausing after the sentence that identified the correlation between Constance's dialysis schedule and the timing of the $4,300 withdrawals. No one in the room contested any of it. Petra's attorney offered a revised figure. $44,000 returned, framing the remaining $8,000 as shared estate administration costs. I looked at Lorraine. She glanced at me once, which was all I needed. The original amount, I said. Petra's attorney conferred with her in a low voice for approximately 90 seconds. I watched the parking structure through the window. At one point, I counted the cars on the visible level. There were 11. He turned back and said they would accept full repayment of the $52,000 via a structured payment plan drawn against Petra's eventual estate distribution, meaning Petra would receive nothing from the estate until the debt was discharged in full. Vivienne's full $109,000 would disburse on the standard processing schedule, within 15 business days of the settlement order. The mediator asked both parties to confirm their acceptance for the record. Confirmed, I said. Petra said, confirmed, a moment after. And the word was not warm, but it was not what I was listening for. I was listening for the word itself. The word existed. It was in the record. The order was signed at 3:41 p.m. Lorraine walked out with me, and we stood in the hallway near the elevators for a moment. She said the disbursement paperwork would go out that week, and I should expect the transfer within 10 business days. She said the structured repayment obligation would remain on file with the court, and that her office would monitor compliance. Thank you, I said. You did the work, she said, which was a professional thing to say, but also the accurate thing to say, and those are not always the same. The elevator opened, and she went back toward the conference room. I took the elevator down, alone. I had the folder under my arm on the way to the parking structure. The same structure I'd been looking at through the window. South side, 4th floor. The way I'd parked because the closer lot had been full. March in the Midwest means overcast light at 4 p.m. and pavement that is dry but still feels like it might not be. I walked to my car, put the folder on the passenger seat, and sat for a moment before starting the engine. The $109,000 would arrive in 10 business days. Petra would receive nothing from the estate until she'd repaid every dollar of the $52,000, installments drawn from her share, recorded with the court, binding until cleared. The settlement order existed. It was in a filing system at the county court on Whitmore Street. The documents that had produced it were in Rosa's inbox, in Lorraine's records, and in the folder on my passenger seat. If the stories that reach this channel, the ones about ordinary people who kept the paperwork and stayed in the room and refused the first number, if those are why you're still watching, a like and a subscribe is how the next one gets told. The transfer came through on April 1st, a Tuesday. I checked my account at 7:22 a.m. from my kitchen table with the same cup of tea. The amount was there in the pending transactions column, $109,000, listed as an estate distribution. I sat with it for a moment. Not a long moment. Just enough to let it register. Then I finished my tea and rinsed the mug in the sink. The folder had been on the left side of my desk since December 18th. I had moved it once, to take the hospice visitor log to the March 24th conference, and I had returned it that evening. The label my mother had written was still legible. Constance, medical/financial, 2024. Her handwriting was precise and slightly forward-leaning, the way she'd been taught in school, with a loop in the C that she had made exactly the same way every time she wrote her own name. That Thursday afternoon, I picked the folder up, looked at the label once, and set it back down on the left side of the desk. I did not shred it. Vivienne put the first receipt in the folder in October without knowing what she was starting. It was a $740 ATM slip she found in Constance's coat pocket after a dialysis pickup. A date, a location, an amount, and she set it on the left side of the folder without yet having a question to attach it to. The folder sat on her desk through the last weeks of Constance's life, and through the funeral, and through 14 days of searching for more. Records kept in advance of understanding are still records. By December 18th, that single slip was paper-clipped to 46 others in chronological order, and together they told Lorraine Teft exactly what had happened in the 67 days between October 14th and November 27th. Rosa Vega sat at Vivienne's kitchen table on a Saturday in December with a laptop and a thermos of her own coffee, and she filtered the bank statement to show only Tuesday transactions. 9 rows, each one $4,300, each one timed to the 4-hour window when Constance was at Mercy Lake dialysis, and the joint account card was in Petra's possession. That single filter turned a list of 47 withdrawals into a schedule, something a probate court could read in 30 seconds. A system announces itself through its own regularity. The spreadsheet does not hide what it contains. Rosa asked the right question. The $740 receipt that started everything was not discovered by anyone with a plan. It was in Constance's coat pocket on an ordinary October afternoon, found while Vivienne was helping her out of the car after dialysis. And Vivienne almost didn't keep it. She kept it because the date was a Tuesday in mid-October, and the amount was specific enough to write down. Somewhere in the household records of someone you love. A bank statement, a coat pocket, a drawer of papers nobody has sorted since last year. There is a number nobody has named yet.